Chapter 1. She was banished to the stool in the corner of the room, left to watch over the activities in her father's robotics lab. Kali was told to remain there and keep out of trouble. Humph, keep out of trouble, she mumbled to herself. She always came to his lab after school, since she was a small child. She and her father would walk home together and share their day. He would tell her about all the wonderful inventions they were working on, and she would tell him about her day spent learning and playing with her friends. Even now, after moving to Vlarli, the biggest city on the Fisia continent, so she could attend the prestigious Pifianka Academy of Polytechnics, they continued this tradition. But it was different when she was younger. Kali had been allowed to wander the lab, question the assistants, and work with the robotics. The staff enjoyed answering her questions and sharing their own knowledge in the field. At 17 it wasn't cute anymore, with her knowledge and skills far surpassing their own. They were put out by her constantly correcting their mistakes. To them she was a child overstepping her bounds by assuming she knew more, which she did. She watched in sheer agony while they poked and prodded at the inner workings of their newest project. When they tried running their tests, the tiny man would lurch to one side then tip over, so they poked and prodded some more. It walked in circles. On another try it did nothing but open and close its mouth, or its head spun in circles. They ran their computer simulations, tested the software, and inspected the hardware, but never made headway. The discussion between the two lab workers was growing more and more agitated with each test. They had been working on this little mechanical man for almost 2 months, and Kali was ready to crawl out of her own skin to fix it. Well, maybe it's your ineptitude on the inner workings of this kind of mechanics that's the problem, Arlej said to his co-worker. The young woman bit her lip, preventing her response to his accusations. Kali also gritted her teeth. Many of the suggestions Chahara, the assistant, was making certainly would have gotten them further along. Even though her assumptions were mostly wrong, they still would have made more progress. Kali nibbled on a fingernail and squirmed in her chair. She wanted to walk over and fix it. It was a minor issue really, one she could correct in her sleep. She couldn't understand how they weren't seeing it. "What course of action would you like to take now?" the assistant said, giving a little more attitude than she should have. The supervisor shot her a glare. "Well, none of my suggestions seem to be the correct solution. I, of course, would defer to your guidance." Chahara gave a fleeting smile. Wow, she must really want this job. I would throttle the guy, Kali thought. Yes, well, this is a team project. I was merely looking for your input, he said. But it's obvious that you have nothing to offer. He stood, trying to look as though he was silently solving the issue of the robot. Maybe, sir, we could go over the schematics one more time. Perhaps there is something we missed in the design, Chahara said. We? He quirked an eyebrow at her. I meant to say maybe I missed something. Right. Yes, that is a more likely scenario. As he turned to go over the schematics, Kali almost said something, but Chahara caught her eye and gave a wordless command to stay silent. Kali pursed her lips. She had had about all she could take. They were wasting time. It could be solved in a matter of minutes. She knew her father was under a lot of pressure to get this prototype to work. With each passing day he worried his career would be put in jeopardy. The two pored over the blueprints. The assistant pointed and drew with her finger, offering suggestions. Arlej brushed her hand away as he shook his head. She was unable to contain herself any longer. Maybe if you check the sensors, Kali said. They may be calibrated too high and the processing core can't compensate. He glared at her. Kali meekly smiled back and shrugged her shoulders. Just a suggestion, really. I'm sure I'm not right. She tried to reassure him. He returned to the schematics as if deep in thought, tracing his finger over the circuits of the robot. He turned back to his assistant and pointed at a spot on the blueprint. Check to see if the sensors are calibrated too high. Then make sure the processing core is compensating. Yes, sir, she said, giving a tiny smile to Kali as she turned. Kali thought to herself, that isn't the processing core he's pointing to, that's the actuator. She shook her head. They made her changes and started testing once again. The man clunked and lurched forward only to tip once more. Arledge looked back at her smugly. I'm not surprised you were wrong. Just because you go to the Pifianka Academy doesn't make you an expert in this field. I've been doing this for 20 years and have no reason to listen to the likes of you, he said, his frustration evident by his reddening face. The lab assistant's mouth dropped open at his reaction. It was one thing to yell at her, but completely unacceptable to yell at Kali. They're still too high, Kali mumbled. What was that? He yelled. You irksome little child. I said, she yelled, louder than she needed to. They are still too high. You don't know, he was abruptly cut off by a hand on his shoulder. Sir, Chihara whispered. She's right. They're still a little too high, but the processing core we have will never be able to handle the sensors no matter how low we set them. We'll likely have to build one ourselves. His face reddened again, but he didn't offer an apology. Edwin, Kali's father, joined them. So, how is everything coming along? Any progress? Yes, sir. I have discovered that the sensors were running too high for the core to compensate. But when I lowered them, I found that the core won't be able to compensate at all. We need to get a faster one. Kali wasn't surprised that Arledge took all the credit for their discoveries and from. Ah, I see. Edwin rubbed his chin, looking over the little robot man. Well, it's too late to put in any orders tonight. Ah, sir, Chihara started, but was cut short. I'm sorry, sir. I meant to mention that I will have to build it on my own. Fine then, in the morning, Gedwin said. You two ladies could learn a thing or two from this man. You're in the presence of a true genius. Edwin patted Arledge on the shoulder. Let's go, Kali. We're already late for dinner. I'm sure your mother is worried. Kali jumped off her stool, grinding her teeth at the smirk on Arledge's face. I'm sure she is more pissed than worried, father. Language, Kali. Language, he scolded. Do you disagree with me? No, I think you're right, but such language isn't necessary. Kali put her arm through her father's as they left the lab. Once they cleared the building and stepped out onto the sidewalk, Kali asked, Father, what happens if Arledge and Chihara can't get that robot to work? He looked down at her. My dear girl, don't you worry about that. I'm certain they will be able to sort out all the problems and meet the deadline in time. But what if they can't? There was a long, grim silence. Father, she asked. Let's not worry about that. I'm certain it will get sorted out. Kali knew exactly what that meant. If they don't build the proper core in time, her father would be out of a job. There was no way Arledge would know where to start, and she was unsure of Chihara's skills. She was going to have to do something about that. She would have to get into the lab and work on it when no one was around. It was the only way. Chapter 2. The little mechanical alarm rang through the room. Kali woke, grabbed at her creation, and turned it off. She was late and had missed the bus to school. Man, she moaned, scowling at the soon-to-be broken clock. Her sleep had been restless. She had tossed and turned, worrying about her father's future at the robotics department. It rested solely in Arledge's hands. His inept, useless hands. Throwing her legs over the edge of her bed, she wiped the remaining sleep from her eyes. Yawning and stretching, she pushed herself up and stumbled about the semi-dark room, looking for clothes to wear. She grabbed her bag off the back of her desk chair and tripped out of her room with her shoes in the other hand. As she hurriedly made her way down the stairs, she missed two and slid down the rest of the way on her butt. Her mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Kali?" She rounded the banister to find Kali on the floor. "I thought you left already. What happened?" "My alarm decided to let me sleep in," she said dryly as she picked herself up and walked toward the kitchen. Her mother followed. "Your shirt is on backward, dear." She pursed her lips to conceal the grin forming. "Man." Kali dropped her bag and shoes so she could turn her shirt around. "Can you make me some toast? You really should have a better breakfast than that." "No time." She pulled her arms into her shirt to spin it around. "It's also inside out." Now her mother giggled. With no thought as to where she was, Kali pulled the shirt off and turned it right side out, then put it back on. The toaster popped as Kali started to yank her shoes on. "That was quick," she said. "This was mine." Hetty quickly buttered the toast and held both slices out as Kali grabbed them, planting a quick kiss on her cheek as she went by. Kali hit the sidewalk at a quick pace as she shoved the toast in her mouth. Once she was finished, she looped her arm through the other strap of her backpack and took off in an easy run. She had been on the track team at her old school, and long distance was her best event. A year ago, when she passed the proper aptitude placement tests, it was highly recommended she go to the Pfianka Academy of Polytechnics. It was the type of recommendation that wasn't suggested, but demanded. Individuals showing predilection with certain skills were sent to specific schools for proper training. Kali scored extremely high on the tests, from preconscious to English, but she showed the most skill and interest for robotics. She had been happy and excited to be able to attend the academy. Until she arrived. Kali quickly discovered she didn't fit in with anyone. She was a late admission, coming in halfway through the semester, but still able to pass all the tests and exams. She had no issues catching up with the schoolwork and the many projects they were expected to do. At the end of the semester she passed her classes with high honors. Her scores were higher than, and far surpassed, those of the top student, Jahala Almond. For this, Jahala made her suffer. It was only a week into the new semester of her second year. There were 10 months to go, but it already felt like she'd been there for an eternity. Her humor and style differed greatly from the other students, and Kali missed her old friends desperately. She came from a smaller town, Armskirk, where there was a great deal more camaraderie. It was in the tiny mountain continent of Nylm Hills. The weather was harsher and the climate was cold year-round. Her mother also felt the difference in their new community, and missed her old friends and family, too. Kali's father seemed to be the only one adapting, and he did well at his new job. At least, up until the last few months, when he made supervisor and Arledge came to work for him. Kali took the quickest way to the school. There was a forest lining the neighborhood, with a children's playground on the other side. She broke through the tree line with ease. She had used it so often the year before there was now a small path beaten down. Kali ducked under low branches and jumped easily over downed logs. It only took her a few minutes to come out on the other side. The grass was wet with the morning dew, causing her to lose her footing every few steps. The sun was barely in the sky as she got to the top of the hill. The summer months on the Phasia continent were only comparable to one other in Uzmarai. Of the four, there was only one desert continent. Ailborn. Its nights were as hot as its days. The only difference in Phasia was summer nights were covered in rain. As Kali descended the hill, she opted to run around the playground instead of through it. The dirt had turned to mud during last night's showers. Kali reached the front doors of the school having barely broken a sweat, although she was breathing somewhat heavy. Pulling the doors open, she stepped through to find the halls empty. Completely deserted. Man. Ignoring the no running in the halls rule, she jogged to her class, hoping the door wasn't locked. Kali slowed, quieting her steps as she reached the door. Peeking through the small window, she glimpsed the teacher with his back to the class. She quietly turned the handle until she felt the pressure release from the latch. She pulled the door open and slid in. The students in the room took notice of her. Mr. Métayer, however, did not. "Hello, Kali." Jahala announced her arrival. "Sleepin' again?" She loathed Jahala Almond, the source of her misery. Jahala smirked when Mr. Métayer turned. "It's good to see you, Miss Hammonds. Please take your seat." "Yes, sir." As she passed Jahala's desk, Kali's toe caught the girl's sudden outstretched leg. She caught herself before falling and ended up doing a fast double step instead. Jahala and her friends giggled. "Ladies, settle down." Mr. Métayer set a calm, steady gaze on them, impelling them to silence. Kali took her usual spot at the back of the class, dropped her bag on the floor, and slumped onto her stool. She glared at the back of Jahala's head with such severity it could have exploded. "All right, my little eggheads," Mr. Métayer said as he clapped and rubbed his hands together. "We are a week into the new semester and it's time to assign partners for the new school project." He smiled wide, showing his teeth. "The remainder of your professors will assign the corresponding projects as the week goes by. Today, my lucky little prodigies, you'll be placed with your new best friends for the year. So, when I call your names, please gather your belongings and sit together." As he turned to his sheet of paper, a murmur swept the class. Kali's stomach clenched uneasily as she took notice of the words for the year. Usually these partnerships were only for a semester. She looked forward to these projects. It was the only time she was accepted by the other kids. Only one partner for a whole year? She gnawed on her lip, starting to worry about being placed with someone who hated her. Kali silently prayed she wouldn't be placed with Jahala or any of her friends. She breathed a sigh of relief when she was paired with Bancroft Kingsford. He was a new kid. She knew nothing about him except he was late taking the aptitude tests. Much later than her. Kali really didn't want a partner this semester. She was always the one to carry the workload for these projects, so working alone seemed more reasonable. Bancroft looked back at Kali, and his eager look told her he expected her to move to the front of the room where he sat. She refused to budge. He gathered his things and joined her at the back of the class. His smile was polite, but Kali greeted him with a curt nod. She had no intention of working with him and was going to speak with Mr. Métayer at the end of the class. As the remainder of the students were paired off and moved to sit with each other, Mr. Métayer watched patiently. The noise levels rose. "All right, let's settle down." A hush settled over the students as they brought their attention back to the front of the room. "Your project proposals will be due in 2 weeks. I want a rough sketch of your idea. You'll use this class time to sort through any issues or concerns you may have with your projects throughout the year." A hand shot up from the center of the room. "No, Mr. Steelreaver, you may not skip class if you have no issues to work through," Mr. Métayer answered the unspoken question. "I had to ask," he said. The class erupted with laughter. Even Kali smirked. "I'm certain these projects will not go as smoothly as you think. This is, after all, your last year here. The other professors and I will be expecting a much higher caliber of work from you all. So your final assignment will be carried through the entire year. I'm looking forward to seeing how much you have all progressed." The hour-long class felt much longer as Mr. Métayer gave the parameters of the assignment. When he finally dismissed the class, Kali jumped from her chair, snatched her bag, and made her way to the front. "Mr. Métayer." She stopped in front of the podium where he stood. "Yes, Ms. Hammonds?" He looked at her with a smile. "I would prefer to work on my own this year," she said. "I think—" "Ms. Hammonds, I'm afraid I can't allow that. Besides, who would Mr. Kingsford work with? All the other students have partners. I'm sure that he would be better off." He held up his hand to stop her. "The partners have been chosen. You will work with Mr. Kingsford. I should think that since you are still relatively new here at the academy you would want to help Mr. Kingsford in adjusting. He seems to be adjusting fine to me, Akali muttered, knowing full well Mr. Metaye was right. He returned to his paper as the new class began to file into the room. Kali stepped away from the podium and pushed her way out of the classroom. She glimpsed Bancroft standing at the door. She hoped he was capable of holding up his part of the partnership. He approached her as she walked by, but she didn't slow down. He had to quicken his pace to keep up with her. So, I hear you're a real whiz with all this technical electronics and mechanical stuff? His comment a poor attempt at breaking the ice. She quirked an eyebrow at him. You should be too. How else did you get into the academy? Did you walk into the wrong school this morning? She took a sudden left turn, which caused him to jog to get beside her again. No. Of course not. Yeah, I get all this stuff. I'm just saying. Kali stopped at a locker and began to work the lock. There was a long, awkward silence as he watched her. Kali pulled open the door and a mechanical arm flung forward, narrowly missing her face. She sighed and heard giggles from the far end of the hall. Both she and Bancroft looked up to find Jahala and her small entourage watching intently. She made a mental note to change her locker combination again. Perhaps she would rig her own trap this time. Friends of yours? He asked, thumbing toward the girls. Yeah, we're best buds. She turned back to her locker and exchanged 2 of the textbooks from her bag. I met Jahala over the summer when we first moved here from Morinfell. She lives down the street from me. She kinda liked me and I told her I had a girlfriend back home. She didn't take the rejection very well. After that she wasn't so nice to me either. He stopped talking when Kali just stared at him. So, we should talk about when we can get together. I would like to get started on our plan right away. Kali gave him a quick up and down. Tomorrow, after class, we can get together and figure out what our project is going to be. Then I'll write up the proposal. Okay, tomorrow after class. Where shall? Turning abruptly, she walked away from him before he could finish his thought. All right then, I'll meet you right here. Kali picked up her pace to get around the corner faster. It was nice meeting you. She heard him shout after her, but she made no attempt to respond. Kali readjusted her backpack and hustled to her next class.